Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're going to be looking at two key establishment protocols. So we're going to be looking at Needham-Schroeder, and we're going to be looking at the station-to-station protocol, and we're also going to be looking at this idea of forward secrecy and what that means and how we can incorporate it into the protocol. So let's get straight into it. If there's any questions at any point, just let me know. But we're going to start with the Needham-Schroeder protocol. So Needham-Schroeder is a shared key authentication protocol designed to generate and propagate a session key. In other words, a shared key for any subsequently symmetrically encrypted communication. So note that this protocol does not rely on any public key infrastructure. No one has any public and private key pairs. The idea is we just want two people to agree on a shared symmetric key that they both use for encryption and decryption. So we have some assumptions with Needham-Schroeder. We assume that there are three parties involved in communication. So we have A and B, who are the two principals that want to talk to each other. But then we also have a trusted key server, or a trusted third party S. So this is a requirement for Needham-Schroeder to be properly implemented. And we assume A and B already have some sort of secure symmetric communication with this trusted third party. So they don't have communication with each other, but they have communication with the trusted third party. So in other words, if this is our trusted TTP, I'm just going to put that, and we have Alice and we have Bob. Alice already has a key with S. Bob already has a key with S. A bunch of other people that they might want to talk to in the future also have keys with S. So S is like this central trusted authority who has these symmetric keys with a bunch of different people. But note, there's no public private keys here. It's all symmetric. Okay, so moving on, we have two terms that we want to be quite familiar with. So we have nonces and we have timestamps. We don't want to get these confused. So in Needham-Schroeder, we use nonces. This is short for a number that we only use once. Now, these numbers are randomly generated and they're included in the message. And they might be randomly generated by the client or randomly generated by the server. If a nonce is generated and it's sent by A in one of the steps, and then it's returned by B in a later step, what could that mean with in terms of B? Like, why might we want to send a nonce to someone? What can anyone think of why that might be useful? Okay, so we'll explore this. So if a nonce is generated and sent by A in one step, and then B responds with that nonce, then A knows that B's message is fresh. So it's highly unlikely to be a replay attack, or it's highly unlikely to be a replay from an earlier exchange. If A sends, let's say NA, which is a nonce generated by A, and then B sends that nonce back, then we know B is active because they've just sent something which we've just sent them. Now, proving that B sent this and proving that we're sending this to B are different problems, but if we knew this somehow, if we knew that B was sending the nonce back that we just sent to B, then we know that B is active. They're almost like awake. But a nonce is not a timestamp. This should be very clear, and they're very different things. So a timestamp is how many seconds since epoch, or some sort of representation of time. A nonce is a completely random number, a randomly generated number that we might use in the future, or to check if someone's active or has access to a key. So the only assumption with a nonce is that it's not been used in an earlier exchange with high probability. So how can we try and prevent nonces from being reused, or how can we reduce the chance that it's been used in an earlier exchange? Okay, so if we want to avoid using nonces that have been used in previous exchanges, we can just increase the number of bits, for example. If the nonce has a wider range of values that it can be, then there's less chance that it's been used in a previous collision, as long as we're generating it randomly every time. Yeah, okay. Let me know if there's any questions as well throughout. I'm happy to answer anything. We have covered this in a previous session. I just want to recap some stuff that will be relevant to today's session, though. So with Alice and Bob notation, Alice sending a message to Bob in plain text. Can anyone just write in chat what this would look like in Alice and Bob notation? Okay, cool. Yeah. So Alice is A, and A is sending something to B, and they're just sending a message M. So this could obviously be hello, or it could be any string. Cool. Good job, Hamza. Okay. Now, another thing we want to represent: A sending a message to B, encrypted with a symmetric key shared by A and B. So let's say this key is called KAB to show that it's shared between A and B. Now, we can represent this. Hopefully remember we can use these braces to represent that. So if M is the message, then whatever's the subscript here is what we're encrypting it with. And this is symmetric encryption. So if we encrypt it with KAB, then we can also decrypt it with KAB. And only someone who knows this key can access the contents of this, or can decrypt the contents of this. Okay, and finally, A sending 2 messages to B in plain text. We can either do something like this. Let's say A sends B M1 and A sends B M2. But this is essentially the same as just saying A sends B M1, comma M2. So this just represents 2 plain text messages that have just been like concatenated with each other, or they're just being sent one after the other. Okay, moving on. So this notation will be quite useful. The actual protocol, the actual Needham-Schroeder protocol. Let's actually dive into this and see what's going on. So with the protocol, we have a few different steps. Initially, so we have Alice, and Alice wants to try and establish a key with Bob, which they can then use for future communication. So initially, Alice and Bob don't have this key. The only keys that Alice and Bob have are, so Alice will have key AS, which is the key between Alice and the trusted third party. And Bob will have key BS, which is the key between Bob and the trusted third party. So both of these people only have keys with this S entity to begin with. So the idea is A will send to S who they are. So A will be like, hey, I'm A. I want to talk to B. And A will also send a nonce in this first message. So this is a number which A will generate, randomly generate, and send to S. S then responds with, and note all of this is encrypted with this key here, KAS. S responds with NA, so that's the nonce that A sent. B, so that's who A can talk to. A wants to talk to B. And also a key, which A can use to talk to B, KAB. Now, S will also send another little payload in this bigger message, encrypted with KBS, which is KAB, so this is just this same key, the key that they can share, and also A, so A's identity. Now, why are we sending this key twice? Can anyone tell me in chat? Why? How come KAB is here and it's in here? Okay, good, Victor. Yeah, so it's encrypted in the second one with KBS. So A can't actually read the contents of this message because A doesn't have this key. A can read these 2 things, and A can see this in its encrypted form. And so when A receives this, A knows now what key they can use to talk to B. A will then send this to B. And this is just the payload that S sent. And this is encrypted with the key which B can actually use, because B has this key. And it's the key that A and B should use, so it's their symmetric key that S has generated for them. And also this. So this basically tells B who they should talk to, or the identity of who they should talk to using this key. So at this point, now both A and B have this key, KAB. The key was generated by S and sent to A, and then A forwarded the message to B, which they could also decrypt. Now, why did we... Okay, yeah, so now that we've done that, why do we have these messages here? What do these messages provide us with? So after they've both agreed on the key, we could just start messaging from here, saying, let's send a message with KAB. But what do these messages achieve? Let's think back to our cryptographic goals. B is sending A nonce, and then A is responding with the nonce plus 1. Why are they doing this? Perfect. Yeah. So the reason why B sends this nonce. So first of all, this shows that B is active because they've just got a key and they're using it straight away. So they must be alive. They must still be awake. And then A responds with nonce plus 1. And this we'll look into why this is significant and why A doesn't just send this. So this is just a rundown of what's basically happening. In the first step, hey S, so S is that trusted third party. I'm A, and I want to talk to B. Here's my nonce. And then the server, or the trusted third party, responds saying, cool, here's your nonce back. Here's a key that you can use to talk to B. And here's something you can share with B so that they also can get this key and they also can decrypt messages that you're sending them. A then says, yo B, S told me to send this your way, and it's just that key again encrypted with A's identity, with this key that only B and S have access to. B then says, okay, cool, I've got the key, here's my nonce. So B generates this number, and then A responds with the nonce +1. Now, as Victor mentioned correctly, so this is proving that B is active, because B is using a key that they've literally just been sent, so they must be doing stuff, right? Okay, yeah, we've got a message in chat. Did you say that S generates KAB? Yeah, so the trusted third party generates this key, key AB. So that's why we assume that S is trusted, and that's why we give them the power to generate these keys for the communication. It's up to S how these keys are derived. They could be a derivation of this nonce, maybe a hash of the identity, but it's up to S at the end of the day. The main idea is the key is only known to the two parties involved in the communication and the trusted third party. So only A, B, and S know this key because it's all sent encrypted. Cool. Hopefully that answers the question. So here, in this fourth step, B proves that they're active. So this is far end operative, if we remember our cryptographic goals. Okay, why is A responding with nonce B +1? What does this last message, what's significant about that message? Good, yeah, so it stops replay. So you're still typing, yeah. So yeah, if A was just sending this, then this could be anyone. This could be like Charlie sending this, because they've just read this message and they're just sending it again. So by doing the +1, it forces A to decrypt this message, because only A can decrypt this message because they have this key. It forces A to decrypt this message, then perform the arithmetic on it of adding 1. This could just as well be like -1 or +10 or +100. The point is we have to decrypt it before performing this operation on it. And then we package it up again. We encrypt it again. Now, if Charlie tried to do this, they wouldn't be able to decrypt this because Charlie doesn't have this key. Only A and arguably S can do this operation here. So this proves that, yeah, so it stops the replay attack. Yeah, cool. So there's some other cryptographic goals in this protocol that we can achieve through these steps. So first of all, we have this nonce in this first step, and S sends this nonce back. Why is that significant? Why is it significant that S is sending this nonce back? Why does A need to send this nonce? Because surely we can just get rid of this, right? Why do we have that nonce there? Good, yeah, good, Sid. So by sending this nonce to S, and S then sending this nonce back in the response, it ensures that S's response is fresh, because we can prove that S is not sending an old message or like a previously generated key, because this nonce is part of that message. So A sends that nonce, S basically sends this nonce back saying, hey, there's like, I've literally just generated this key right now, so it's fresh. So that's our sort of proof that this is a fresh key, or it gives us more confidence that this key is freshly generated. And it also means that someone else who might have compromised a previous key from a previous session can't just replay one of S's requests. Say this is a malicious actor. If the nonce wasn't here, they could just replay a previous request if they've broken the key. Even if they don't know this key, if they know what the packaged up key inside is, then they can resend that. So by incorporating this nonce, it means we can't have that attack vector. Cool, so that ensures that we have a fresh key from S. Okay, now by encrypting it with KAS and KBS, what cryptographic goal does this achieve? If we're encrypting it with something that only A and B and arguably S can access, what does that tell us about the key? Cool, yeah, good job, Ash. So by having it encrypted with KBS and KAS, that achieves key exclusivity. So only the parties involved in communication have access to the key. And obviously we want that in any cryptographic algorithm. We don't want anyone to have access to the key. Otherwise it wouldn't be a good key establishment algorithm. Now the last goal that this achieves that I just want to go through is here. When B responds with this, that achieves once authentication. Can anyone tell me what once authentication means? And also, if you want to go the extra step, how does that step achieve or guarantee once authentication? Yeah, perfect, Ash. So once authentication is the idea of knowing that the opposite party actually wants to communicate with you. So when A sends this to B, saying, hey, here's a key you can use, and you can communicate with me, A, using this key, B then responds with a nonce. If B didn't want to talk to A, then they wouldn't respond with this, because B knows that by using this key, this is who they're talking to. They're talking to A. So this step, by providing A's identity in this message, achieves once authentication, because we know that B wants to talk to A as soon as they send this message. And then obviously we have that once authentication the other way when A responds to B, because A knows they're talking to B with that message. And then from here, any further messages are basically just encrypted with, so if we have M, it's just encrypted with KAB. So A might send something to B, encrypted with KAB, then B can send something to A with KAB. But the idea is they've established this key between them, this symmetric key, which is KAB. This is just a reminder of our cryptographic goals. So fresh key, we achieved that through our nonces at the beginning, so we can tick that off. Key exclusivity, we've achieved that here because we're using KAS and KBS, which are the keys that they share, the keys that each A and B share with a trusted third party. Far end operative, because we know B is active because they send the nonce after they get the new fresh key. And once authentication we've also achieved because here we know B wants to talk to A when they send their nonce over. So we've achieved all of our cryptographic goals, and that's why we have that mutual belief in the key. Okay, moving on. Yeah, so it hits our cryptographic goals. Are there any questions about Needham-Schroeder before we move on to forward secrecy? Let's move on to forward secrecy. Okay, forward secrecy. Now, a protocol has forward secrecy if it keeps any of the messages in that that have been sent between each other from an attacker who has a recording of the protocol run and the long-term keys of the principals. So an attacker cannot access those messages even if they have these two things. They can't access the messages. So before we get into how it works, why might we want a protocol to have this property? Why might we want forward secrecy in a protocol? Surely we can just use Needham-Schroeder. Why do we want this? Okay, we've got some good answers in chat. So, yeah, forward secrecy, it offers protection against, for one example, governments can force people to give up their keys. Another example is hackers that might steal private keys. Obviously, if that's compromised, long-term keys compromised, we don't want all of those conversations to be compromised as well. So forward secrecy offers that protection against those two things. There's a lot of reasons why we want this kind of stuff. Okay. So that brings us to the station-to-station protocol. This is another key establishment protocol, but here we have the idea of public and private keys. We have the idea of public key infrastructure. Now, in the Diffie-Hellman protocol, A and B choose two private keys, A and B. Now, I believe we have... So P and Q are two public parameters where P is a prime number and Q is a primitive root of P. Can anyone remind me how we agree on a shared secret key from A, B, Q, from A, B, and Q, and P? Cool. Okay. Yep. Good, Ash. So, we have Alice and Bob. Good old friends. So Alice will generate her private key A. Bob will generate his private key B. And Alice will then compute Q to the power of her private key mod P. Bob will compute Q to the power of his private key mod P. And then they both share this with each other. And then for Alice to compute the symmetric key, she will do... So she knows Q to the B, and she'll raise that to her private key, mod P. And Bob will do the same, Q to the A, so this is what Alice has sent, raised to the power of B mod P. And so their shared private key is Q to the AB. Now, given Q to the A and Q to the B, the idea of Diffie-Hellman is it's hard to get from these two values to this value in polynomial time. That's the idea. That's the assumption of Diffie-Hellman being strong. But if we know one of the keys, so if we know QA and we know B, or we know QB and we know A, then it's very easy, it's trivial to get to this. We just raise it to the power of the private key. So that's Diffie-Hellman. Now, can anyone think of a vulnerability in Diffie-Hellman? Other than, we're not counting this as a vulnerability. We assume that this process is secure and it's hard to go from here and here to here. Yeah, perfect, Ash. So we have our vulnerability, which is a man-in-the-middle attack. Now, we want to avoid this. We don't know that the person we're communicating with is actually the person that we want to communicate with. That's our main vulnerability in Diffie-Hellman. So this is just a visualization of what that might look like. So here we have Alice. She generates her public key. So first she picks a private key or private value A, and then she generates her public key, which she shares. Now, an adversary might be in the middle of Alice and Bob, and the adversary might generate their own private keys. So they might use C to talk to Alice, and they might use D to talk to Bob. And so the adversary essentially unwraps any of Alice's messages and then rewraps it in their own unwrapping paper, sends that to Bob, and Bob thinks Alice has sent that. Bob then responds to the adversary. The adversary unwraps it, wraps it up for Alice, and sends it back to Alice. So that's the idea of this man-in-the-middle attack. We want to avoid this. Correction, yeah. So this would actually be Q to the AB mod P. Obviously, we don't know the true Q to the A, Q to the B. So this would be mod P, mod P. Yeah, good catch. But the idea is, yeah, they'd agree on this symmetric key. It'd all just be mod P. Right, from there, so we want to look at how we can avoid this man-in-the-middle attack. So we can mitigate the threat of a man-in-the-middle attack by using a trusted third party. Now, trusted third parties allow us to have digital signatures and public key certificates, which mean Alice and Bob can basically prove they are who they say they are. So the station-to-station protocol relies on public key infrastructure. Unlike Needham-Schroeder, here we need some sort of public-private keys. Now, STS adds digital signatures and the encryption of those signatures with the Diffie-Hellman shared secret. So it builds on top of Diffie-Hellman, and it means we can achieve 2 extra goals on top of Needham-Schroeder. So we can prove, on top of Diffie-Hellman. So we can prove each party knows their private key, and we achieve this via signatures. So this is integrating that public key infrastructure into it. And another goal we achieve is we can prevent eavesdropped. That is not English. We can prevent eavesdropping from. Well, that doesn't make sense either. We can prevent eavesdroppers from learning anything about identities or messages, and we can achieve that via encryption. So it builds on top of Diffie-Hellman, and it also builds to an extent on top of Needham-Schroeder. Now this is the actual protocol. So A sends G to the power of X to B. So this is very similar to our Diffie-Hellman. This is actually identical to the first step of Diffie-Hellman. Before this protocol, actually, one thing I haven't written is just what we had on the other slide. So A chooses X less than... A just chooses X. B chooses... Y. Okay, so A will send this, G to the power of X. B will then send G to the power of Y, and encrypt this using G to the XY. Now, this is only derivable from someone who knows either this and Y, or either this and X. So this is only derivable from A or B, given the discrete log problem is hard, computationally hard. So that means only A and B can decrypt what's here. So A sends GX to B, B sends GY to A, and also sends this payload. So what is this payload containing? What does this notation mean? Can anyone say in chat? Cool, yeah. So that SB notation just means that we were signed, or that message has been signed by B. So B takes his value, A takes their value, and B is just signing that. So that essentially means, or this proves that B knows the 2 values that they're going to be exchanging these keys from, or deriving the keys from. A then responds, again encrypting with GXY, so this is their shared symmetric key again, and they're encrypting the exact same thing, signed by themselves. So B is signing these two, A is signing these two. So what this essentially achieves is it means A and B agree on the values that they're using to derive this shared key. And from that point on, they just communicate with this shared key. So what that signature essentially provides is that guarantee that they know who they're talking to. Assuming that A has B's public key initially and B has A's public key initially, then if we didn't have this, then they wouldn't know who they're talking to. A could be talking to Charlie or John or someone, I don't know. But by signing this, it proves that it's them. Like they know who they're talking to. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, could be. So the idea of these fresh values is that it's fresh for each session run. So where it differs from Diffie-Hellman is this is not like a fixed private key we use with everyone for every single session. This is generated freshly for every single session. And we talked about why we send this. And so something to note is at this point, both A and B know the key, or they should both be able to derive the key. So what is it that we've just said we send this for? Why do we send that second message where A signs it? What does that allow us to have in the protocol? Yeah, good. So it gives us that mutual authentication for both parties. So when A signs this with their public key, then it means B can know that A is the one sending this, right? So it provides that guarantee. And then they can just message using that shared key which they've both been able to derive. Now, for each session run, so every time they communicate, they generate a new key. So that's something very important to note. Now, can anyone think of any issues with this protocol? Or like any assumptions that we've glossed over that aren't very realistic or might be impractical? Spot on, Ash. So we might not have the public keys. How does A know B's public key initially, and how does B know A's public key initially? This could just be fake A. This could be Ayush, and Ayush is just signing with his key. When actually B wanted to talk to someone else. B wanted to talk to Alice. So the idea is we need a way of them initially knowing. So A initially knowing B and B initially knowing A. So can anyone tell me what can we use to achieve that, or to make that easier or more practical? Cool. Okay, yeah, we got some good answers in chat. Okay, so station, we can add certificates to so that Alice and Bob know each other's public keys, or so that they can trust each other initially. They're not just spraying and praying, and anyone who listens can respond. So the signatures don't really prove anything if they don't know each other's public keys. Now, the trusted third party can sign identities and public keys, and this will create a certificate, and this certificate ensures that Alice and Bob can verify each other's public keys instead of just going off of vibes, basically. They have a way of saying, okay, I know I'm talking to Alice, or I know I'm talking to Bob. Does that make sense? Is there any questions about how certificates work? Right, so this is our protocol without certificates. Now, can anyone tell me what steps would the certificate be useful in? Like, where do we want to add in the certificates to make this more reliable, or so that they can trust each other? First and second. Okay. So where could we have that first and second certificate? Talk to me. Like, where would we insert it? Okay, that's fine. So with the certificates, we actually insert it here. So we have cert B here, and here we send cert A. So in this message, so in message 2, when B responds to A saying, hey, here's my public key, here's proof that I've also acknowledged yours, B also sends a certificate. So this basically says, okay, this public key that I'm signing this with, it's actually me, like for real, like no cap. This is me, right? So it provides that extra certainty that A is talking to B, because then when A receives that, A doesn't just have to go off vibes trusting that this is B. A uses this certificate as like that proof. And then A also sends their certificate in step 3, so that when B receives that, B knows that whatever's signed here is certified sent by A. Why do we not send a certificate in the first step? Surely that would make it quicker, no? I believe if we did this, it would have the same effect, so like moving this up here, but I'm not sure about it being quicker because you're still going to send the same data. And how the slides recommend it is like the A certificate is sent in this step. But obviously, yeah, as you say, the certificates can be sent prior. A and B might know each other's public keys from like a previous communication. But in the protocol steps that are on the slides, they just send it in each protocol run, just so that it's like proved. And often a lot of certificates will have like expiry dates. So that's even the case with SSL certificates, where the certificates expire after a certain timestamp. So by sending the certificate, a fresh certificate every time, it just proves that they are very newly certified, and it just adds to their overall trust and reliability as someone who you're trying to talk to. No worries. So this is just essentially, yeah, what happens. So the full station-to-station protocol includes certificates for A and B, and these certificates contain public keys which are signed by a trusted third party. Alice and Bob can then communicate without knowing each other's public keys beforehand, as long as they have some mutual trust in the third party who's signed these certificates. Side note, I've not actually got a slide on this, but how would Alice and Bob certify or check that these certificates are valid? Can anyone just drop like the steps that they'd take to essentially check that the certificate's valid after like the second and third message? What would they do to check it? Yeah, so we've got an answer from Ash and Chat. Check verification lists and consult certificate authorities. That is something they might do, but on a like more basic note, a certificate is just signed by the trusted third party. So cert B, for example, is actually just B's identity, and I'm just going to put B's identity and B's public key signed by the trusted third party. I'm just calling the trusted third party S in this case. So S is just signing this with some extra metadata, so maybe like a timestamp when they signed it, when they created the certificate. But yeah, so we use the certification authority's public key, as Sid said, to then check this signature against the actual certificate. So if it's legit, then we can basically trust them. And so if we trust the certification authority's public key, then we must also trust the certificate. And that's how Alice and Bob can then gain trust in each other's public keys. Don't remove it. Okay. Yeah, I'll keep that there. Yeah. And building on that, so the shared key depends on newly generated fresh nonces, GX and GY, which forces every single session key that's derived from them to be fresh. So this hopefully answers your earlier concern, Hux, as well. So this allows station to achieve forward secrecy, because even if they know the long run private keys to the corresponding public keys, that doesn't mean anything if they don't have like the session keys. So even if A reuses an old key as well, something to note is as long as B uses a fresh nonce, the new key will be fresh. So it's quite hard to attack it. Even if you have control over one of the like keys, you can't then like B also has to reuse the same key that was used with this one to generate the same shared symmetric key. Cool. So that's everything I wanted to cover on the protocols. If there's any questions, just drop them in the chat. Yeah. So one thing I was unsure about while looking at the stuff for this session is the difference between forward secrecy and a fresh key. So a fresh key is the idea that we generate a new key for every single session, but this alone doesn't actually guarantee us with this forward secrecy property, because if the fresh key is encrypted with a long-term key, and that long-term key is compromised later, then all of the sessions can be decrypted. Whereas with forward secrecy, if the long-term keys are compromised in the future, the idea is the session keys can't be decrypted. And we achieve this. We haven't actually covered this in a lot of detail, but it's using ephemeral keys where we use a fresh Diffie-Hellman exchange. All ephemeral means is temporary, so we just throw it away. And so we use a fresh Diffie-Hellman exchange for each session, which is why that g of x and that g of y we looked at are fresh for every single session. And so we looked at why that also matters, because if someone records your traffic and steals that private key, they still can't decrypt your past traffic. Hopefully that's clear. I'm going to end the recording here. If you're on YouTube, like, sub, hit the bell, drop a comment if I made any horrible mistakes. But yeah, see ya.